Are we going to see that big special teams overhaul after all? Find out next.
You are Locked On Nebraska, your daily Nebraska Cornhuskers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thank you for making Locked On Nebraska your first listen today and every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel, where Super Bowl 59 is here, and there's no better way to make every play more exciting than with the FanDuel Sportsbook, where you can bet just $5, and if you win, you'll score $200 in bonus bets. That's for first-time customers. Download the app or head to FanDuel.com to get started today.
All right, welcome in. It is a special Saturday podcast, special edition of the Locked On Nebraska pod. Matt Rhule met with members of the media today in Lincoln. By the way, I'm Mitch Sherman from The Athletic. Connor Happer, 1620 The Zone, is with me. It was a quick 30 minutes with the head coach that probably could have gone 60. Connor, let's touch on the 5 biggest topics from his first press conference since the Pinstripe Bowl.
By the way, I noticed there was
what did you think?
There were still people asking questions, Keith Mann came in with the whole one more and is like, I think we got about 8 more. It was the most I've ever seen where Rhule had to kind of get pulled out of the room. We talked about this the other day and how long would it go, and it would have gone longer. So it's like the over under on it is it kind of it invalidated it because he was yanked from the room, but it was right at like 32 minutes. And he was still trying to answer questions or get asked questions as he walked out the door. And Keith was saying, he's got to get to the juniors. They're here. The recruits are waiting for coach. So they were really pushing the schedule. I mean, they shouldn't have scheduled the presser for 10 a.m. if he had to speak to all of the recruits at 10:30, don't you think? Yeah, probably would have been a better way to go about it. But there was still a lot of ground covered and a lot of stuff talked about in the 30 minutes there. Are we starting with special teams, or is that where we're going first?
I think so. Is that like the number one thing for you, or if you had to go with takeaways from this, does that stand out? What was and wasn't said about special teams?
It's been the thing that's been on everybody's mind because it's an obviously you have the open position first of all, and then you have Rhule's most recent comments after the bowl game, which were I think we're going to do like a total overhaul there. That's kind of what that needs. That was a month ago, and what I got from him today was not necessarily any inclination that there's going to be a total overhaul at that position. You have to find somebody to lead it still, and it sounds like Phil Snow is kind of taking charge on on the selection process, it seems.
So right, he's not going to coordinate special teams, to be clear.
Yeah, he's not.
No.
There's gonna be a new coordinator, but then Rhule talked about some of the ins and outs of how they felt like it went this past year, and and there was mention of, hey, it wasn't necessarily on the scheme or the time that we put into it or the effort that we put into it. It was just like, we had some bad snaps, and so that is not the thing that would necessitate a major overhaul, even though that was what was said a month ago.
From the sounds of his answer Saturday, his overhaul is more about the personnel. And they brought in a snapper, Kevin Gallick from New Hampshire. They brought in a punter, Jack McAllister from Washington. They've got a snapper back. They've got a punter back. They've got a couple of kickers back. And they're going to hire a special teams coordinator. He said they're still going through the interview process, that Phil Snow has been running that while Matt Rhule and the assistants who are on the road are out recruiting. The special teams coordinator job will not be a recruiting role. So the urgency is back down a bit from that perspective. But, I've been saying all along, and I will still contend that there's urgency to do this because you're in a part of the offseason where there is planning that's happening, and there is self-evaluation that's happening, especially now as we get into February and the coaches are off the road. So the thing that he said in response to that, or on that topic, is that it's not been scheme, and it's not been the preparation or the meeting time that was the problem last year. He pointed pretty specifically to the snapping issue that Nebraska had, which undeniably was a big issue and led to kicks being blocked and kicks being missed. But it doesn't take into account that Nebraska ranked 114th nationally in opponent punt returns, that it ranked 92nd nationally in opponent kickoff returns, 111th in returning punts itself, and 100th in returning kickoffs. So there's no snapper on the field. Well, there is when you're punting, but there's no snapper on the field when you're setting up to return a punt. No snapper that whatever. You know what I'm saying? I don't believe that it was entirely or necessarily even mostly about the long snapper last year.
No, I mean that was where, like, that was the crack in the wall that led to the water getting out, but there were other cracks in the wall that
and we're not just talking about block kicks. Like, they had special teams issues throughout.
Exactly. So, man, it's fascinating. You almost get the sense that when he said that a month ago after the bowl game, it was sort of like to kind of appease people. That's kind of the way it feels to me now.
Well, it was the heat of the moment too. You had just almost lost a game because of just a couple of special teams breakdowns. So, but yeah, I think this is going to continue to be an issue that's discussed and evolved some over the offseason. And maybe this is where Phil Snow comes in and becomes very valuable, because he's the associate head coach. We did find out on Saturday that he's going to work with defensive ends, the edge rushers. And maybe he can be your guy. He can be your guy to oversee special teams. I've never really bought into the theory this offseason, this young offseason, that Matt Rhule was going to take over special teams, or he was going to take some great interest in coaching the special teams. Like, he's got a salary cap to manage.
No, I agree. And Nebraska, it seems like, okay, so the approach is, let's fix the snapper, let's fix the specialist, let's get better in those categories, and then let's see where we land. And my guess would be that Nebraska doesn't get a whole lot better in the return game, or all those things. But maybe part of the plan going forward, Mitch, is that you make it so special teams doesn't have to matter quite as much, right? You create more margin for error for yourself with the way you play offense and the way you play defense and things like that.
Why not make it matter? I look at Notre Dame.
I agree. That the most buttoned up teams across the country, I mean, they're you could just expect it. They're just really good at special teams, and they don't make mistakes on it. And Nebraska, seems, I'm sure Matt Rhule wouldn't tell you this, but seems willing to, roll those dice and see how it plays out for him.
I'm going to cut him some slack here. I'm going to say that the next time we talk to him about this, that when they have a special teams coordinator hired, and maybe we hear from Phil Snow for the first time in the work that he's done with Nebraska football, and there's another conversation at another press conference or a more informal media gathering, and we talk to Matt Rhule about special teams, I'm going to cut him some slack here, give him some grace. He got off the road literally yesterday after spending a month recruiting, and they're trying to assess the season and get this portal stuff done and put a full coaching staff together and think about rev sharing. And I believe when we get to the spring and he's had a chance to look more at this, or not even look more at it, he knows what happened on special teams last year, to prepare his statements and their plan more about special teams. I think it's going to be across the board. I think that they truly want to get better at coverage and returns, in addition to being able to snap the ball.
I want to hear it though. Even if it's it's so funny too, because Rhule knows exactly what people are talking about, and he knows what's being said about his football team. And I think, there has been certain examples of him over the last couple of years saying stuff to appease the fans and to say, no, you're wrong about this, or no, you're right about this, or whatever it might be, which I thought today would have been the perfect opportunity to be like, it is of utmost importance to us that we fix this, and we are very good at it, And I just didn't hear that. I didn't hear that urgency, which was surprising.
Yeah. Okay. Topic number 2, the spring. He was asked about the comments that Troy Dannon made on the Huskers radio network earlier this week that don't call it a game, that Nebraska would have some kind of an event on April 26th at the end of the spring, but that it wasn't going to look like a game. And we've all theorized about why that is since we heard that from Dannon. And if it was about the injuries on the offensive line that we'll get to later in this episode, if it was about the roster cut down and the size of the roster, which we'll also talk about on this episode. And then there was this is where Matt Rhule went with his answer about the likelihood of having a spring game. We'll play the clip and then come back and respond to it.
There will be any form of scrimmage that day?
Yeah, I don't know that yet, but I'll be honest with you, I highly doubt it. And I think it's really fundamentally, I hate to say it like this, it's really because, last year we're one of the more televised, we were one of the more televised spring games, and I dealt with a lot of people offering our players a lot of opportunities after that. So to go out and bring in a bunch of new players and then showcase them for all the other schools to watch, that doesn't make a lot of sense to me. The word tampering doesn't exist anymore. It's just absolute free, open, common market. And so I don't necessarily want to open up to the outside world. I don't want these guys all being able to watch our guys and say, wow, he looks like a pretty good player. Let's go get him. So
fascinating. I mean, I believe him, right? I like it. I believe him when he says that. And I know coaches have, that's been a thing that people have talked about for a long time with spring games being on TV and stuff like that. And the reason for them to sort of tone down what they show and things like that. So I'm cool with it. Now on the other hand, financially, Nebraska is still trying to find out, revenue streams and it's nice for them to have the game televised, but they're going to have to adjust going forward.
Take a loss of a few $100,000 that you would sell for tickets in order to keep your talent off of television. You could have a spring game and not televise it, I suppose. That was the case for 50 years of spring games at Nebraska. They only started to televise these things in recent years, but he was clear about what is apparently his number one reason for not wanting to have a spring game. Now, I think there are other factors, and
definitely.
it may not even be a choice after this season. It just may be a thing where they don't have enough players to make 2 teams, or there may be changes to the spring schedule across all of college football that dictate the inability to play a game. It just seems that it's trending in a direction where this is all going to go away. And I think some coaches and some programs kind of got on board with that. We don't want to put our players on TV in April kind of concept before Nebraska and Matt Rhule arrived at that after the spring game last year. And I don't know of any examples where hard pressed to think about this. Like, who went in the portal in April for Nebraska last year that might have been scouted during the spring game? I'm just asking this rhetorically. Like I'll look into it after we do the show.
What he's saying though, Mitch, is like they didn't enter the portal. they had to fight to keep them.
Right. And that could be it too. Right. You don't know what was happening behind the scenes.
Yeah. Right. All right. So we could have some more thoughts on that when we return. There's a few other topics that we want to dive into that Rhule got into, including how they're going to actually physically work out the 105-man roster. What might that look like? Some more details on that when we return here on the Locked On Nebraska podcast. But first, a word from our friends from the FanDuel Sportsbook, where Super Bowl 59 is here. 1 game left, 2 teams, and endless possibilities for you. There's no better way to make every play more exciting than with the FanDuel Sportsbook, whether it's predicting the first touchdown score, the MVP of the game. You can even bet on the coin toss. FanDuel makes it easy for you to get in on the action. There's also live betting all game long. You can adjust your bets. You could hedge your bets as the game unfolds and feel that thrill from the kickoff to the final whistle. And even before the kickoff, the live betting feature lets you stay involved no matter what is going on in the field. And the app is very, very easy to navigate. Plus, knowing that you could place a $5 bet and potentially win $200 in bonus bets for the Super Bowl or for after the Super Bowl That is the icing on the cake, ladies and gentlemen. Download the app and head to FanDuel.com to get started. And once again, bet $5, and if you win, you'll score $200 in bonus bets. That's with FanDuel.com. Bet with FanDuel, official partner of Super Bowl 59. All right, welcome back. Connor Happer and Mitch Sherman with you. Let's talk about the 105, how they will construct it. Mitch, I think you asked the question, and you asked him to sort of harken back to his experience in the NFL, which was a fascinating, and he had a fascinating sort of response to it. So basically, the idea was you're going to take the first 54 or 57. Like an NFL roster. Maybe you take one more quarterback is something that he mentioned. And then basically you have the rest of the 100 or 95 as a second team, so you play it out like you do the first team, just the second version of that. And then Rhule talked about an extra 5 to 10 spots as you get to the back end of the 105 for guys who they just want to be on the team, where position doesn't matter, where they are culture guys, they want to be Huskers, and they have earned their spot to be there. And he used Roman Mangini as an example there. So it's basically a walk-on program, but it's a 100, and it's a really, really concentrated walk-on program. But it's fascinating how he sort of explained that and how they're going to approach it the first time around here.
Yeah, I think that the final 48, like after you have 57, and he very quickly had a 57 as a number. So what is it in the NFL? It's 53, right?
53. Yep.
Yeah, it's your active roster. Now the final 48, the second 48, they're going to be active. Like this is not like
correct
apples to apples with the NFL. It's trending more like the NFL construction. Everything in college football is trending more like the NFL, at least if you're in the Big Ten or the SEC. And this is just another example of that. Like they'll have 57 that they consider to be like frontline players. And then there'll be 48. You'll have young players, developmental players, like players who are bidding to get into that 57. And there's not like a hard line, I don't think. It's not like, hey, they're only going to travel these 57. No, I mean, if they can travel 70 on the road to Big Ten games, they're going to take 70 on the road. It's going to include at least 13 from the second 48. It might include some from that final 10, that final 5 to 10 that you talked about. Like that's the 10 that is really intriguing, and it's interesting that they've got it. They've already got it detailed to the point where they know that they want to have 10. Like these players aren't necessarily going to be getting the big revenue share dollars. They may not be on scholarship. Like you can fund 105 scholarships, but you don't have to scholarship 105 players. And I think very few, if any, programs nationally are going to scholarship 105 players. It sounds like at Nebraska, they might do 95 to 100. Mm-hmm. And then the final 5, they're going to be your traditional walk-ons. Like him using Roman Mangini was interesting. He's a young receiver from Arizona, just an undersized guy that they like on special teams. They love his attitude, and like he's going to be on the 105. So he's a culture guy. He's a locker room fit. He's going to be inspiring for other teammates. I mean, that would be a part of Nebraska football that truly was lost. And I think you would really lose something if you didn't have that class, that kind of player on the roster. It's always been essential to the fabric of Nebraska football when it's won championships. That group of players, and it's been a bigger group in the past, but that group of players has always been strongest when Nebraska is good. So, I would think most of these guys are going to be from high schools in the state of Nebraska.
Definitely. But it's funny. You could see the hierarchy already sort of starting. Like I wouldn't be surprised if in a year we are actually talking about it in this way, where like you have the top 54 or the top 57, as Rhule said. You have the second, the 2s and the 3s. Maybe we come up with a name for this level, right? But you have top, you have middle, and then you have guys that are there, culture guys, whatever you want to label them as. You could I don't think, and in that, obviously we talk a lot about competition getting on the 105, and certainly that's still a thing. But I think what Rhule is going to try and figure out and sort through in the spring is how to, which category to put them in, and then the subcategories of that category. It'll be really cool to watch, I think.
Maybe those guys should get the single digits.
Oh, the extra roster guys,
the culture guys, like they're part of the team. I mean, Nebraska wouldn't be doing this if they didn't think that was a huge part of what made the program successful. And I don't believe, and I say that somewhat jokingly, I don't believe that they're going to be singled out. I don't think you're going to know. Well, you're going to kind of know, but you're going to know about Roman Mangini for sure, since you mentioned him. But there's going to be some question like, hey, is this one of the culture guys? Is this one of the last 10? As you look at this player, and you'll have a pretty good idea. I'm guessing that you and I could look at the roster on August 28th when Nebraska kicks off at Arrowhead Stadium and be able to get 8 or 9 out of those 10 very easily.
Mitch, I bet we could do it right now.
I don't think so because there's 36 of them or something like that instead of being just 10. Like
if you gave us all the names right, like we could do this for a podcast. If you gave us all the names right now, we could put labels on them and say, all right, this is
category 1, 2, or 3.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And
or
some of
at this point, there's still a 4th category of people who won't be here.
I mean, you're going to see something like, let's just take Williams Nwaneri. He's a category 2 guy right now, I think. But the goal for him by August is to have him on the 57. And it's going to be fascinating to see, do the players know? Like, is there a place in the locker room? Like, you're on the 57 or you're in the 48? Like, I don't know. Maybe I'm like being too literal with this and interpreting what he said today. But the players are going to have kind of an idea. They'll generally know like which category they fit into, and it might be a night and day thing. Like, it might be, this is when you practice, or you're in this group when you practice, or you come into the meeting at a different time if you're on the 57. They could create competition and do some things that could make the team better by making that more public, at least within the locker room.
And then there's your group, and we'll talk about this when we come back. There's some guys who are hurt right now. There's some guys who won't be going through spring ball. So we'll talk about the effect that has and as they try to sort this thing out as they head into spring. And then a few more topics that Matt Rhule dove into today. And by the way, we'll have an entire week or maybe even a month of talking about the things that Matt Rhule said on Saturday. So we'll be back after this.
Final segment on this special Saturday edition of the Locked On Nebraska podcast. I'm Mitch Sherman from The Athletic. Connor Happer, 1620 The Zone, is with me. We are running through the most interesting things that Matt Rhule had to say in his 30-minute press conference inside the Hawks Championship Center on Saturday morning in Lincoln. So, roster size right now is something that was discussed on Saturday. And Susan Elza, who was in the room, Nebraska's chief of staff, she chimed in when Rhule went looking for help that the Huskers are at 126 today. I'm scratching my head a little bit because I think it might be 125, but I don't want to doubt anything that Susan Elza says because she's pretty much on top of it all. So she's probably right. But that 126 or maybe 125 does not include the 7 incoming true freshmen who are still in high school. So don't look at it and say, oh, they only need to get down 20 more. There are 7 who are still in high school, and I'll list them for you. Malcolm Simpson, Jeremiah Jones, Tyson Terry, Cade Peterzak, Juju Marks, who's in Lincoln today for the junior day. He's a senior. Sean Hammerbeck and Brian Tapu. They are all linemen except for Jeremiah Jones, who plays many positions. So you add those 7 to the 126 and you're at 133 on the roster. They got to cut 28. And, Rhule said he laid it out for players before the bowl game, after the bowl game. And some of them just said, I'm coming back until you tell me I have to go.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that was the group of people that he said, it's like, yeah, those are going to be tough. Because he said, hey, there's a bunch of people that we kind of knew weren't going to be here by next fall. And we were like, hey, we're going to give you an opportunity, just go, hit the portal. Or, I mean, that's also why he mentioned this anecdote with Deshaun Singleton too, who's returning to the team. He was like, yeah, well, Deshaun, I think you should go. Like, you come back with a 3rd round grade. And and he's like, yeah, well, I got this extra year of eligibility that got plopped on me, and I could be Ty Robinson next year, so I'm going to stay. And so that's another guy at the back end that Rhule has to probably say, we don't have room for you.
Another player, and in a crazy twist, it could be his brother. It could be Deshaun Singleton's brother, who was a walk-on on the team. Is that DJ Singleton? I believe that's right. That's his name. Yeah. So,
crazy.
But it's a boost, of course, for Nebraska to have Deshaun Singleton and Javen Wright. Javen Wright, maybe I don't think he's the first, but one of the rare 7th-year seniors to have ever played at Nebraska. Something else before we move to the final topic that he did drop in this answer about where Nebraska's roster is at today and where it's going to need to go in the 6-7 months ahead. He said that they believe right now that they've got to be at 105 by the first game, August 28th. So we've kind of been operating up until this moment under the belief that they had to get there at the start of camp or even in July, like when revenue sharing kicked in. And that doesn't appear to be the case. Like they can be over. Like it sounds like they'll go into preseason camp a few players over. And he also said that if a player is injured and out for the year, that they could be replaced on the 105. So Nebraska may actually have 107 or 108 players in the program next year during the season. Generally, you get 2 or 3. Last year you had, Blyhill wasn't a season-ending injury, but you had Demetrius Bell, which was a season-ending injury in the spring game. You had Teddy Prohaska, who had a season-ending injury in preseason camp. Like they could be replaced, but could they be paid is the question. I think that's something we would like to know going forward too, because if you're not on the 105, can you get revenue sharing? Are you eligible to receive the money that these players are going to get as essentially salary in the next year? You could make it up in NIL if you can't get paid, but
I think that's probably what I default to is like, it doesn't matter necessarily where it's coming from.
It doesn't.
Yeah. So,
but they have to have the NIL money to do it.
Yeah.
And I think they do.
And I think they probably will. Okay. So you mentioned Prohaska. So
yeah,
just some clarity on some injuries as they head into the spring. All these guys, including Prohaska, Turner Corcoran, who eventually just recently, it sounds like, had that hamstring surgery.
Injury in September.
Henry Lutovsky, Gunnar Gatula, Tyler Canuck, each of those guys had some form of a surgery during the offseason. That's a lot of offensive linemen. That's a
whole offensive line.
That's an entire offensive line. And so those guys are going to be limited at the very least in what they could bring during spring. And Nebraska already has, an offensive line numbers thing that they're working through here. So I guess the way to spin it is what Rhule said, which is a lot of opportunity in the spring for some young guys.
Yeah. And I mean, I think that the conversation about putting the spring game on TV or having the spring game on TV and why that's part of the reason that it's going to go away is a moot point, because I don't know how you're going to have a spring game with the offensive line in the situation that it's in. We read the list a few minutes ago of the true freshmen in this class who aren't on campus yet. And there's a couple defensive linemen in there, but it's the offensive linemen also. So you don't even have like the bodies to put out there in a spring game. Like, oh, true freshman. Yeah, you're not going to be ready to play this year, but at least we can use you in this. No, they're not here yet. So at least in the cases of most of them, they're not here yet. So I don't expect a spring game. I don't know what it's going to be. And we knew that going into today. So there's just more reasons now why it's not going to happen. Carter Nelson, the wide receiver turning into a tight end, and then Demetrius Bell, who was hurt last year in the spring game. They are also rehabbing and are expected back for the summer. So a couple pieces in Nebraska's pass catching group won't be around for spring practice.
Yeah. And how about this? There was really just one mention of Dylan Rhule on the very last question.
Amazing. We went 29 minutes out of 30 with no Dylan. And we did on this show, and they did in the press conference.
How's he doing? And he was asked about specifically what Rhule wants to see from him in terms of leadership jump and things like that. And Rhule said that, he's got to get the wide receivers to, you can ask them to show up. You got to get them to show up. That's real leadership to the throwing things that they have during the off season and stuff like that. And he also mentioned getting himself to the proper weight as well. Rhule mentioned getting Dylan Rhule to the proper weight as well. So a couple things on the table for Dylan as it slowly but surely becomes kind of his team now.
Yeah, Rhule didn't want to say what weight that would be. He said, "You're not getting me to go there." This was like as he was getting physically pulled off the stage by Keith Mann, Nebraska's media relations director, who had orders to get Rhule to those recruits at 10:30. Yeah, I mean, I think they want Dylan to play. What do you think? Around 215 next year, 215, 220, and he was maybe 5 to 10 pounds above that.
Yeah.
Last season and probably still is right now. I haven't seen him at the Supernovas on Friday night and at the Nebraska Illinois basketball game on Thursday. I mean, you're in this when you go out there in the middle of the court like that for the dunk contest. He was helping Heinrich Harburg. Heinrich and Dylan, by the way, like quite the duo. They've become inseparable, it appears. But when Dylan's got the spotlight on him, like people are going to talk about everything, and and then Rhule went and brought it up. So he'll get there. I mean, he's an elite level athlete. Like that should be the least of his problems is getting to that 215 range. But they want him to be able to run. They want him to be able to move the sticks with his feet in his sophomore year.
It's quite the opposite of. I remember Adrian Martinez's first offseason and the whole thing with him, and it happened.
Putting on more weight.
He gained he probably gained 20, 25 pounds of muscle.
They wanted him to do that though.
But they wanted him to do that so he could run. And this is now kind of the opposite with Dylan. They want him to be a little bit more nimble, so he can, give them the opportunity to get some yards when he needs to, which he still whatever weight you are, you still got, if it's in your skill set, it's in your skill set. It's just, can you get there as quick?
Is Dylan going to be at the Super Bowl?
Oh, probably. He's everywhere. Novas, whatever, he's there.
Wouldn't be surprised. Wouldn't be shocked at all. So that as a former NFL player, his dad has access to tickets. So you might see Dylan and Dayton, standing who knows where. It's like, where's Dylan? The game that we could play for the remainder.
Probably doesn't get a camera shot from Fox at the Super Bowl, but he does an Instagram or something like that.
It'll be on social media.
Yeah.
All right, we've talked enough. We'll be back with you on Monday, I'm sure, to talk more about what Matt Rhule had to say on Saturday in Lincoln, and of course with you for the rest of the week ahead. So thanks for making Locked On Nebraska your first listen today. For your second listen, go check out the Locked On Big Ten podcast. Lots of off-season news around the conference. Craig's got you covered. He puts the Big Ten first. Find Locked On Big Ten on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts.